This is the Bible Ranger, and let's go ahead and unlock the mysteries of heaven, part 2. And you notice there's a title here that says, Heaven Won't Last Forever. And you're thinking, but I thought it's supposed to last forever. Well, we'll get into it. All right. So, in Revelations 20, verse 6, at the second coming of Christ, we have a glorified body. Okay, we'll be priests and we'll be reigning with him for 1,000 years. Now, the believers will be part of the first resurrection. Now, after the 1,000 years, Satan must be loose again, and that'll be a final rebellion. It'll be very short-lived. And then, in Revelation chapter 21, yes, let's go back to that question. Is heaven temporary? This is not clickbait. The current heaven today is temporary because those verses say, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, and the first heaven and the first earth have passed away. So it will be a physical heaven on physical earth. And this will happen after the 1,000 years reign of Christ. Okay, and we'll have a chart in a little bit, a few screens from now. Oh, well, there it is. So in this basic chart here, you'll notice that we have the current age, what's happening right now. We have the tribulation, or the great tribulation, and then we have the second coming of Christ right there. Then you got the 1,000-year millennium right here, which of course there's 3 teachings on it. And then you have, after the 1,000 years, you have new heaven and a new earth. So what's the purpose of the tribulation? This part right here. What's the purpose of that? Well, there's 3 things that normally we talk about. In Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 through 14, there's a revival that goes on. Okay, there's no Christians on the fence. Okay, you will have this moment where choose this day who you will serve. Number 2, Isaiah 13, 9 through 13, there'll be an annihilation of people that reject Christ. They don't want nothing to do with him. They want the mark of the beast, and they will be done away with. Number 3, Hosea 5:15 and Matthew 23, they will be, on the Jewish people, there will be an acknowledgement that Jesus is the Messiah, and it will bring all Jerusalem that is left over, it will bring them all to repentance. All right, in the book of Luke, chapter 16, verses 19 to 31, there's a story there of Lazarus and the rich man. This is not the same Lazarus that got raised from the dead. This is different. Some people think it's a parable, but the Bible does not say it's a parable. So we're going to call it a true story. Now, even if it was a parable, it still gives you an example of something that would be true. Okay, so in this story, the rich man had knowledge of who Abraham was. Now, Abraham lived hundreds of years, or even 1,000 or 2 before he did. But he knew who Abraham was. He still recognized Lazarus, that was in his time frame. And he also realized that his brothers were not following God, and that his brothers were in trouble. They were going to be tormented just like he was. So he tries to make a deal with Abraham to try to get Lazarus to go back from the dead and try to convert his brothers. But Lazarus said, if you don't believe with what the word already says, even if somebody raised themselves from the dead, they wouldn't believe. So apparently our memories stay intact. And with additional knowledge of people that we've never met, you kind of already know them. So I can see where we can recognize our relatives if this is the case. Also in Matthew 17, verses 2 through 9, there's a story of the Mount of Configuration, where the 3 disciples do recognize Elijah and do recognize Moses, and they're not contemporaries. Moses and Elijah was way before they were, but they knew who they were. And also in the story in Luke 9, 29 to 36, Moses and Elijah is there with Jesus, okay? And they were having a conversation with Jesus, and they knew that Jesus was going to be crucified in Jerusalem. They were caught up on current events. So apparently, when we die, we seem to have this extra knowledge. So Elijah and Moses, they knew about Jesus' future plans. Now, in the book of Corinthians, it should say 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 2 to 4, Paul is having a heavenly event, a vision so powerful that he can't tell if it's reality or it's a vision. It's that real to him. And even though it says, I knew a man 14 years ago, everybody knows that is Paul talking about himself. He's just being humble about it. Now, in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, verse 1, it's Paul describes the race, the following of Christ as a race, okay? And we need to finish strong and keep our eyes on the prize. And he compares it to people back then in his time, 2,000 years ago, that were running kind of Olympic type games. And the crowd is kind of like the great cloud of witnesses, the way the verse says it. And it describes heaven like that. So it's, even though I can see where there's an attachment of these clouds of witnesses to chapter 11, the faith chapter, it is possible, I'm not dogmatic about it, but it's very possible that also dead believers could be watching us from heaven. Like I said, it's not a doctrine, it's just very possible. Though verse alludes to that, possibly. All right, Philippians 3, verses 20 to 21. We'll have a glorified body just like Jesus. That's what the verse says. Just like Jesus. And we know that in chapter 24 of Luke, in a lot of the chapter, there's a lot of verses on it, but in verses 39 and 40, they're surprised that they actually saw Jesus. And Jesus said, look, handle me. Notice that I have flesh and bones. That's what I'm made of. So he's telling you he has flesh and bones. This is Jesus himself speaking. And we're going to have a body like Jesus. And then Jesus ate in verses 41 and 43, and he drank. So we'll be able to do what we do now, but in way better fashion with a glorified body. In verses 31 and 36, apparently the body of our new glorified body can travel interdimensionally. We don't know how far heaven actually is, but distance doesn't seem to matter. We can appear, disappear on the speed of thought, it seems like. Because we sent out satellites out there like Voyager. It's been out there for a long time, and it still hasn't shown any pictures of heaven. The only description of where heaven is in the Bible, it just says up. So that's not that very clear. So our new bodies will not be subject to space or matter. Now this glorified body, why do we even need one, a physical body? Well, because we're going to live on physical earth, and heaven is going to be physical. Now, how do you say that? Well, in Revelation 21:4, it implies that initially we'll have memories of lost friends and family and lost opportunities and regrets. And that's pretty rough because we have to kind of live, it seems like we're going to live like the 1,000 years with that in mind. But who wants to live like that for eternity, right? So after the 1,000 years is over, God is going to uncreate this earth and uncreate the heaven that we have now, and he's going to create a new heaven and a new earth. And in Revelation 21:2, New Jerusalem comes down from God. That's what it says in the Bible. From God to earth. And God will dwell with us himself. That's incredible. Just imagine living with God like Adam did. And in Revelations 21:4, he's going to wipe away our tears, and he's going to wipe away, apparently our memories from that. Because, to wipe away our tears, it must mean that it doesn't bother us anymore. Because, you're crying about something that's happened in the past, and you're going to remember it again, and you're going to keep on crying about it. So I would imagine it implies that we're not going to have any memory of those events anymore. It's going to be any more death, and any more pain. That's going to just be a glorious time. So heaven is going to be like a city. In Hebrews 11:10, Abraham perceived heaven to be a city. And then a few verses later, it says that God has prepared them a city. And then in Revelations 21:2 and 3, it says, I saw a holy city come down. So that's how it's described. It's definitely described as a city. Now, the building materials are beautiful. It's really unique, actually, because this is John trying to describe something he's never really seen. So the best he can do is made of jasper and is made of gold that is transparent, like clear as crystal, which obviously does not exist here today on earth. God's going to have to make new elements in the periodic table. And then the gates are made of pearl, and then there's other precious and semi-precious stones. It's just beautiful. It's right here if you can actually read that. But the glory of God, well, let me get the next verse. There'll be no need of sun or moon, because God will supply the light himself. And that makes sense that everything is transparent because God's glory is going to go through the walls, through everything. And it's just going to be beautiful, more than I can describe. I can't give it any justice. All right, let's talk about some dimensions here of the actual heaven coming down, the city of heaven. It's approximately 1,500 miles in height, 1,500 miles in length, and 1,500 miles in width, which, could possibly fit two different shapes, can actually fit. The most common everybody thinks about, and this is probably the case, is a cube. And I haven't verified it, but the Holy of Holies supposedly is cube shape. And obviously the tabernacle was made to copy things of heaven. Okay, so even though the heaven now is temporary, God still does things to foreshadow what he has. So the second shape would be the pyramid. And the reason I say that is because it does fit. It does fit the height, the length, and the width. But it seems like Satan has some kind of fascination with the pyramid, like these cults and occults and Illuminatis, and there's always a pyramid involved somewhere along the way. So maybe Satan is trying to copy something that he saw in heaven. So I'm just throwing it out there. But most likely the cube type shape is going to be the most possibility of what it's going to look like. So recapping. So we'll be reigning with Christ with a physical body, and most likely it's a possibility that we'll recognize our relatives before us and after us, and they could be watching us now. Possibility. Now, he made a way for you and for me, okay? And the way is through Christ. Oh, basically, we just got to follow him. Just stay faithful to the end. And, study your word and tell others about Jesus. If somebody saved your life, you could not shut up about that person who saved your life. You just be introducing him and complimenting him to all your friends and relatives. And that's what happens when you get saved. But check out these verses here in Romans and John. And I'd like you to partner with me to spread the word. And the way this, logarithm is, it's like you start sharing and you start clicking with the thumbs up, which only takes a second. And it helps spread the word. So I appreciate that very much. This is the Bible Ranger, keeping the Bible simple, yet rich in content. Thank you.